Hey there, noble ones, welcome to Metatron's Academy. Someone made a statement and I've got to double check it. Headphones on. Japanese is not hard to learn. Tips to learn Japanese from Chloe D.Y. He. Okay, so, well, it took me 8 years to get fluency in Japanese. Let's see why. Maybe it's because I'm a muppet.
If there's one thing that a lot of Japanese learners say about learning Japanese, it's about how difficult it is. There are tens of thousands of kanji, some of which have...
I mean, you don't need to learn all tens of thousands of kanji. I guess like 2,000, you'd be okay. Even with 1,000, you can text and read emails.
Have many readings with seemingly no rules. Grammar structures are complex and so different from English. And
So what have we got? Zaru o ba yokatta. Oh, nakereba yokatta. Yeah. Koto naku narade wa te wa ikemasen. Te wa ikemasen sounded difficult. Tabenakute wa ikemasen. Tabenakute wa ikenai. Tabenakereba naranai. I mean, it's not that difficult though after you practice it a few times. Atte no nari ni. Okay.
even other East Asian languages like Chinese, with the exception of Korean. Vocabulary and the way things are said in Japanese are so unique that it's not surprising for us to feel like learning Japanese is extremely difficult, if not impossible. This might be a hot take, but
Muri da yo. Well, it's not impossible, obviously, but it is difficult. It is a difficult language. You've got to be real. Of course, methodology will help, but I don't want to speak over her.
learning Japanese is not hard. Japanese is only as difficult as you believe it is, and with the right mindset and study techniques that work for you, learning Japanese can be a smooth, manageable process for anyone. That doesn't mean there won't be challenges along the way, but it doesn't have to take you years or decades to start speaking Japanese and be well on your way to mastery. And in this video,
It will take years. Like, I appreciate the positive thinking, and I think it will help a lot of people. In fact, I'm not against what she's saying. She's doing it for the right reasons. She wants to motivate people, because a lot of the... I mean, I remember when we started, I did Japanese and Mandarin at university, and I remember that, particularly with Mandarin, believe it or not, but even Japanese, first year classes, Mandarin, we had 230 students in one class, by the way. It was a massive hole, of course. And then we had about 150 for Japanese. Second year, it was halved. Third year, it was only like 25 of us. So yeah, a lot of people give up and quit because these languages are objectively difficult. I do appreciate that she's trying to help, because yeah, if people didn't give up, really all you need to do is not give up. Just keep on doing it, even if it's difficult. Eventually you will start getting some results, and that's going to help you, motivate you even more, because then you start getting praised, you start to be able to understand and all that. But it does take years. It does take years. And that is the only thing that I'm complaining a little bit. Let's not tell students, oh yeah, you study Japanese for 6 months in your own time, a couple of hours a day, maybe 1 hour a day, 15 minutes a day for 6 months, and you'll reach fluency. Not gonna happen. Not gonna. Manage your expectations. Within 2 years, if you do it right, you will get to a point when you're confident in having a conversation, depending on the topic, but having a conversation and understanding everything they're telling you, maybe occasionally missing a word or two. But in general, in a couple of years, I think it's doable. And of course, if you go to Japan with a solid basis, say you do 3-4 months of full immersion, super basis for the structures, and then you move to Japan and stay there a year, in a year, you'll get to be able to get to a conversational level. Absolutely.
I'll be breaking down some common misconceptions about learning and speaking Japanese. So let's get right into it. The first thing I want to address is the idea that Japanese is harder than other East Asian languages, like Chinese or Korean. For English speakers, Japanese may initially seem more challenging because of its many writing systems, but other languages like Chinese have their own challenges, such as tonal pronunciation and an even larger number of kanji than Japanese. Mandarin has 4 tones, which can dramatically alter the meaning of a word depending on its pronunciation. For example, the sound ma in Mandarin can mean mother, ma, hemp, ma, horse, ma, or a question particle, ma, among many other things.
Oh, she skipped the stranger. She skipped the 4th tone. Ma. So I would say ma, ma, ma. That's how I would pronounce the 3rd, by the way. And ma. But it's true that there is also the lack of tone, like in the particle for questions, that's non-tonal, which is why sometimes this is debated. And some people say, well, there are 5 tones. But to me, no, there are 4 tones. And then there is the possibility to pronounce a syllable without a tone, which if it's without a tone, it's stupid to count it as a tone. That's just me. So I agree with her, 4 tones, but she didn't show the 4 tones. Tonal languages are more difficult than pitched languages like Japanese, but let's do remember that Japanese is a pitched language. Now, do you need to learn pitch? Not necessarily. You will always sound foreign if you don't. If that doesn't matter to you, that's totally fine. You can absolutely reach maximum fluency. In fact, you can become extremely proficient and never study one day of pitch, but that means you will always sound like a foreigner. With that being said, I love studying and spending time into pitch, and if you do, then actually I think proper pitch can be harder than tones. But that's simply because tones have less rules, whereas a pitch is insane with all the exception this and exception that. Apart from that though, Japanese and Mandarin, it really depends. It's very subjective. Grammar wise, I think Japanese is more complicated. Mandarin has a lot of structures that make it really difficult too. They're both quite difficult languages.
Mother, ma, hemp, ma, horse, ma, or a question particle, ma.
Yeah, that third was not good.
Among many other things, depending on the tone. This tonal feature is often challenging for learners, especially those that come from non-tonal language backgrounds.
Yeah.
Japanese, on the other hand, does not have tones in the same way. While Japanese has pitch accent, which affects the word meaning depending on the pitch, this is far simpler and much less complex than tones in Mandarin.
I completely disagree. The pitch accent, if you want to do it right, it's really, really tough, and it has a million exceptions. In fact, even Japanese struggle with the pitch if they're not from Tokyo or Yokohama. So yeah, I disagree.
Mandarin and other tonal languages. A simple mispronunciation in Mandarin can change a word entirely.
True.
While pitch accent in Japanese generally has fewer variations to worry about. Korean, on the other...
I would say that I partially agree on this, because it's true that if you mispronounce or with the incorrect pitch, they'll still understand you. In Mandarin, it depends. There are situations in which they'll understand you anyways from context. But yes, if you say a single word and you mispronounce the tone, then you're saying a different word. It's not the same in Japanese. A little more forgiving when it comes to that, because whether I say inu or I say inu, it's fine. It's still dog. Also because, I mean, inu is how they say it in Osaka, and inu is how they say it in Tokyo. So at the end of the day, it's not a big deal in that situation. Maybe with hashi and hashi could be, because one means bridge, one means chopsticks. But then again, it's a lot more forgiving when it comes to misunderstanding.
On the other hand, has a simpler writing system, Hangul, but still has complex grammar.
Yeah.
So Japanese isn't necessarily harder than other Asian languages, it simply presents different challenges.
Yeah,
and
good.
this goes for
Fair.
any language out there, not just other Asian languages or Japanese. Each language will have its own unique challenges for you to overcome.
It is wrong to say, though, that all languages, I'm a little bit of a contrarian today, but hear me out. It is wrong to say all languages are equal. They're all equally difficult and in different ways. No. When we look at language difficulty, you can approach it in 2 ways. One, we can talk about objective difficulty, and then we can talk about subjective difficulty. Objective difficulty are those parameters that are objectively, like for instance, the Italian alphabet, it's objectively easier than learning how to read and write in both Japanese or Chinese. Also, it's not true that Chinese has more characters in the sense that if you know 2000 in either language, you are able to read and write. So you still need 2000. There are languages that are objectively harder when it comes to the grammar, that the pronunciation is harder. It is what it is. Some languages are harder than others. But when it comes to subjective, a lot has to do with your own personal talents. If you're really good at pitching up, if you have an excellent ear, then pronunciation is going to be easier for you than it is for someone else. And so that if pronunciation was one of the big issues in that language, then of course for you, objectively it's harder, but subjectively to you, it's actually not going to be a big deal. Likewise, if depending on what your first language is Spanish a difficult language? Well, of course, for an Italian, it's going to be easier than for an Anglophone. And that is because a lot of the words are very similar. And even more so for a Korean, Spanish is going to be a nightmare in comparison to an Italian or even a French, because we have a lot of words in common. And then the same thing can apply when you're trying to learn the kanji, but you're Japanese. You already know. You just have to learn how to read them in Chinese. And to say that all languages, they're all difficult in different ways, and therefore at the end of the day they're all equal, that's wrong. Not true.
It's important to remember that this is a very normal part of language learning, and that it doesn't mean anything about you or your ability in the language. It's important to approach challenging concepts calmly and allow yourself the time and patience to grasp them.
100% agree with her.
Certain grammar or vocabulary might not sink in immediately, and all it needs is a little time and patience for your brain to form those new neural pathways in order for you to understand, remember, and apply what you've learned. Ultimately, the hardest language to learn is the one you approach without the right mindset. With the right resources and consistent practice, Japanese can be just as...
And also passion. If you are passionate about the language, it's going to be a lot easier for you to put in the amount of hours that you're going to have to put in order to reach a reasonable level of fluency.
With the right resources and consistent practice, Japanese can be just as accessible as any other language. The next one is one that I've heard from a lot of people, and I've even thought to myself at times, and it's that kanji and grammar are notoriously difficult to grasp. However, and this might sound a little controversial, but kanji and grammar are only as difficult as long as you haven't started them, and are truly only as difficult as you believe them to be.
Sorry, no. Kanjis are objectively difficult. The number of years, even for the Japanese, by the way. Again, I appreciate the positive thinking. Kanji are difficult. It takes a monumental amount of hours to memorize the strokes and the characters and all their varieties.
I get a lot of comments saying things like, "Oh, but Chloe, Japanese is only easier for you because you can read Chinese." And yes, while I did grow up speaking Chinese, which by the way has a pretty negligible impact on speaking Japanese because phonetics work so differently in both languages, I did not always know how to read Chinese. I had to take the time to learn the basic characters and build a foundation of kanji knowledge. Then I started writing and learning more about them. I was born and raised in Australia. I have never studied in a Chinese-speaking country like China, Hong Kong, or Taiwan before. And basically, what I'm trying to say is, I was not in an environment where I would naturally just learn how to read and write kanji had I not put in the time and effort into building those skills, which I could then transfer towards learning Japanese. You'll find that once you know the basic foundational kanji, more difficult kanji is simply a combination of multiple smaller kanji, and if you can draw those connections, you'll have a much easier time learning to read and write.
Yeah, I would say I agree with this. So basically, the idea is, in my experience, hit the first 800 kanji, and then the second 800 will be easier. You still have to commit them to memory, so the mnemonic aspect of it is still massive. But it's true that a lot of the kanji stop being new because the radicals, the components...
Learning kanji isn't something that should feel overwhelming. And today's sponsor, Mochi Kanji, makes learning Japanese straightforward and manageable.
Lovely. I'll have to check the sponsor out.
About learning kanji in my kanji video, which I will link up here for you to watch later.
Check it out.
As for Japanese grammar, again, the same thing applies. What I figured is you kind of need to approach it with an open mind and understand Japanese from the perspective of a Japanese speaker as opposed to an English speaker or whatever your native language is. Let me explain what I mean by this. When you come across a new grammar structure, what you want to do is begin by breaking down and analyzing the different grammar rules it's combining and why it means what it does when it's put together in that certain way. For example, the grammar structure of a verb plus yo ni yotte wa means depending on how you do verb. Like depending on how you consider or think about something, we would take the verb kangaeru and do kangae yo ni yotte wa. If we break it down, we get yo, which means like the way something is, and when combined
with... so instead of just learning the sounds, you want to know what you're actually saying. Makes absolute total sense, yes.
The verb kangae yo, it would mean like the way someone thinks, and then we have ni yotte, which takes the verb yoru to depend on, with the directional particle ni, and all of that is in te form with the particle wa that marks all of that statement as the topic of the sentence. You don't need to think too much on this. However, when you start to have a general understanding of what the different elements of a grammar structure are, it'll make a lot more sense to you why they are used the way they are.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's fair. That's fine. Children, when they learn a language, they don't really focus on grammar that much. They acquire it naturally, which is something I'd like to discuss on a dedicated video soon, how to pick up grammar naturally, like children do. But then again, to a child, if, for example, a sentence structure is made up of different words, those words, the child can recognize them, and so it's easier for them to learn it. So up to a certain extent, without focusing too much on the actual grammar rules, which once again we don't learn when yet we reach fluency, so that should give you a hint on priorities. But understanding what the single components mean individually is actually a very good idea.
The next misconception is that Japanese is an isolated language. That is, it's its own standalone language because it's so different from others like English, and that's what makes it so difficult to learn. While it's true that Japanese belongs to a different language family than English,
I was gonna say,
and has a large number of differences from even other East Asian languages like Chinese and Korean, Japanese is a language that draws a lot of influence from other languages. Arguably, the most obvious influence is from Chinese, with the use of kanji and Chinese loanwords, particularly when it comes to concepts related to philosophy, governance, and religion.
I would say that Chinese stands to Japanese as Greek stands to Italian, in the sense that it's a language that used to be the center of power and culture, and then it influenced a lot of the high-end vocabulary. Of course, Latin playing a pivotal role in Italian too, but still, a lot of our words, like philosophia, obviously coming from Greek, a lot of those words do have that connection that it's very similar, if you think about it, between Chinese and Japanese.
However, even English is having a significant influence on Japanese these days, especially when it comes to pop culture, business, and technology. Japanese is a language saturated with loanwords from English, Chinese, French, and others, which form an essential part of the language. Many of these words are used on a regular basis, like terebi for television and konbini for convenience store. Japanese follows a subject-object-verb order, similar to Korean and Turkish.
And Latin.
Japanese as a language has evolved through extensive contact with other cultures, borrowing and adapting vocabulary.
One last thing I want to say, because I don't want to watch the whole video, but one last thing I want to say, when it comes to Japanese and the trend of adopting foreign words, of course, they adapt them to their phonetics and rules. That's why convenience store becomes konbini. So basically they are cutting pieces up. They don't always do that. Sometimes they just basically adapt them to the phonetics of it, which is why you get McDonald's for McDonald's. And it's a language that tends to do that a lot. Whereas in Chinese, they tend to create neologisms and new words within, still using Chinese. So Chinese tends to do that less. Japanese will do that a lot more. Just pick the word and adapt it to the language. Can that really help? Sort of, but for me, if there is a choice between a katakana word and an original Japanese word, which sometimes there is, I usually tend to prefer to use the Japanese one because katakana is not a huge fan. Anyways, she was nice. I appreciate the positive thinking. It's just that some of the things she said while she was trying to debunk the myths sounded like myths on their own. Anyways, I think she was really nice, so do subscribe to her, and if you're into learning Japanese, and perhaps she can help you out with tutorials on grammar and all that. And I hope she has a great day, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.